Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the MAPI Webinar on Vested Outsourcing. My name is Yingying Xu, Director for the Global Logistics and Transportation Council. I'm joined by my colleague, Dan McClish, Chief Economist and Director for the Purchasing Council here. We have two speakers today. The first one, Mrs. Kate Vitasek and Mr. Matt McClish. Kate will start the webinar by introducing the idea of vested outsourcing. She's an internationally recognized innovator in the practice of supply chain management and outsourcing. Her approaches and insights have been widely published in over 200 articles, including her popular book, Vested Outsourcing: 5 Rules That Will Transform Outsourcing. World Trade magazine named Vitasek to their list of the 50 most influential people and ideas impacting global trade. Currently, she's a faculty member at the University of Tennessee's Center for Executive Education and is the founder of Supply Chain Visions, a top 10 boutique consulting firm specializing in supply chain management. Without further ado, I would like to hand over to Kate.
Excellent. Thank you, and thanks everyone who is calling into this webinar. As Yingying mentioned, I'm going to give an overview of vested outsourcing, and then we're very excited to have Matt from P&G, who is going to tell the P&G story about their journey to vested and the benefits that they have received from applying this concept called vested or vested outsourcing. So I do like to let everyone know that our research on this concept is based on research and studying real companies with real results. Many people ask how we picked our case studies. It was because buyers and suppliers in their outsourcing relationship both raised their hand and said, hey, we have a fantastic relationship. Often it was because we had seen awards that they had seen or that they had won in various industry sectors, or had been in the trade press talking about their relationship and the results that they've had. That was actually how I came across the P&G relationship, was an article that was in Cornet Leader magazine. But others were awards. For example, the Microsoft and Accenture has received 5 awards for their outsourcing effort and the results that they've had. Well, our work has led to 4 books on the topic, and today I'm going to focus mainly on the what is vested outsourcing, but I will talk a little bit about why. So for anyone who is interested in learning more after the webinar, I encourage you to pick up a book or two and read them. Many people ask which book should I start with. I love the last one, which is the case studies, because when you read about real results with real companies, it really, I think, is impactful to hear the stories. So we definitely have different levels of research and how we've shared those through the work that we have done. So let's start off with why. Why vested outsourcing? We've actually used the words interchangeably, vested and vested outsourcing. Vested really is a mindset. It is a choice to move to what we would call win-win or value creation. If you think about when you outsource or you buy any type of service, there's 3 approaches that you could use. The majority of buyer-supplier relationships fall into what we call a value exchange relationship. I give you $1, you give me a unit of service, right? Many companies use a value extraction, especially the larger companies use their procurement muscle, and they will go through very rigorous competitive bid processes and get their hammer out and say, you know, squeeze the supplier. So they're trying to extract value out of that relationship. And a few organizations have chosen to use true win-win solutions that really create value. When I use the term value creation, it's 1 + 1 = 3, 4, or 5, because you're taking 2. You're taking the buyer and the supplier, and together enabling them to do something that they had never done before. So this concept of win-win isn't a new theory. It's something that's been around for a while. You know, people talk about win-win in the trade press. Well, I really like to share with you that it's not just about a nice saying. It really is baked in research. So win-win solutions that expand the pie versus split the pie have been studied really since about the 1950s with a gentleman named John Nash. Now, Nash won a Nobel Prize for his efforts in 1994. So you started to see in the early 90s people start to go, wow, win-win, that's not just a nice thing to say. There's some, credence behind that. That work has been built on by a gentleman named Oliver Williamson, who won a Nobel Prize in 2009. And what he studied is the theories that the contracts should be flexible frameworks based on credible and not muscular, or as I talked about, value extraction philosophies. And that when you create a flexible framework for doing business, it enables you to embrace the dynamic natures of business and to create value in a better way. Actually, Williamson talks in his research about a hybrid business model. It's not a make and it's not a buy. So you're really creating something in the middle, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that hybrid approach to doing work, and that's going to come across as an area that Vested is really this hybrid approach. And then the last academic principle that the concept of Vested is built on is around a guy named Robert Solow. Now, Robert Solow also won a Nobel Prize, and what he brought to the academic community was the finding that 87% of economic growth comes from technical change and innovation. So we need to, as businesses, focus on innovation and driving that innovation. So in a nutshell, how do you create these win-win flexible frameworks that drive innovation? And that's what Vested does. And we basically, in our research, codified the methodologies that companies like P&G, McDonald's, and Microsoft were using that were already applying these concepts. So people ask, well, did we invent anything? No. We did not invent Vested. We called it something cool, but the companies that we studied actually were the pioneers in the industry that were changing and using a different mindset with how they've outsourced. So let's move forward. I want to talk about Nash because I think he brings an interesting perspective to the concept of Vested. As I mentioned, he won a Nobel Prize in 1994. He'd been studying this concept of win-win thinking since the 1950s when he was a student at Princeton. And you might remember Nash through the movie The Beautiful Mind, which profiled, his beautiful but crazy schizophrenic mind. But he was a mathematician, and he went on to study how these cooperative win-win games work. And so here I have a picture of a 2x2 matrix. And in the simplest form, relationships can follow one of four paths, right? They can both be cooperative, so the buyer and the supplier choose to be highly cooperative, highly collaborative. That's where you get this win-win thinking. If you both choose to command, that would be a lose-lose. And somewhere in the middle, there's a win-lose situation. You win some, you lose some, you win some, you lose some. Well, the majority of outsourcing relationships, or any buyer-supplier relationship for that matter, today is in this, you win some, you lose some, you win some, you lose some. So we like to think of that as a ping-pong match because it's not very productive. It just kind of goes back and forth and back and forth. You may switch out a supplier, get a new supplier. Is it going to be exponentially better? And so what we encourage companies to do is break that mold of value exchange, right? Value exchange. You win some, you lose some. Here's $1. Here's a unit of service. No, I'm going to get it for 90 cents instead of $1. And to focus on that nebulous win-win. So in our work on these win-win thinking, and how to apply this in an outsourcing relationship, I have here another graphic that I think is interesting. And what we've done is kind of showed this continuum of outsourcing and the decisions or the different types of business models that can be made. So at the very, very top, you would have what we would call an equitable partnership model. It's when a buyer and a supplier create a joint venture. Well, of course, if you have a joint venture, you're economically linked through a new entity. Of course, that's going to be win-win. Well, down on the bottom of this little chart, we have a simple transaction paste. And then you move up that continuum and you have an approved provider and then a preferred provider. And then you get to performance-based relationships. This is where very popular in some of the IT deals where they have a service level agreement and there's going to be a penalty for not meeting a service level. Hey, you didn't perform, I'm going to take away. Or you perform a little bit more, I'm going to add to it with a little bonus. So we're starting to use carrots and sticks to get the outcomes we want, but we're still anchoring in some of this transactional buy-sell mentality. And in a vested relationship, you break that out of that transaction-based philosophy and into an outcome-based philosophy, where the service provider is highly compensated for achieving outcomes, and they're not compensated very much at all for just showing up and doing the work. So there's all kinds of ways that you can craft the pricing models around those, but the big difference is that it's an outcome-based approach, right? And it creates value through these win-win economics. In essence, you're growing the pie, not fighting over the pie. The more successful the buyer, the more successful the supplier. The more successful the supplier, the more successful the buyer. Again, win-win at its best. So now let's change and talk about the what. So if we know that there's sound academics behind the concept of vested, how do these companies go about and apply these philosophies, and what are the philosophies that makes the P&G Jones-Lang-LaSalle relationship so successful? What are the philosophies and drivers around why Microsoft and McDonald's have been so successful in how they look at their suppliers and manage their suppliers? Well, there were really 5 key things across all of these relationships that we studied that were very successful. So by studying these deals, we reverse engineer how, what are these mindsets, what are these rules or protocols? And we actually call them rules because to us they were so inviolable. If you broke a rule, it was like cheating on the relationship. And as you craft your contract, these rules became the essence of how you would architect those outsourcing contracts. So in the center there, we have a win-win, right? So we have our win-win relationship, and then around that, we have our 5 rules. Well, rule number 1 is an outcome-based versus a transaction-based business model. I'm going to go into each one of these rules in a little bit more detail. Rule number 2 is focus on the what, not the how. Rule 3 is clearly define the measurable desired outcomes. Rule 4 is a pricing model with incentives that optimize for cost-service trade-ups. Actually, P&G calls it trade-ups, not a trade-off, but a trade-up. How do I optimize and create the power of the and? And then rule number 5 is an insight versus an oversight governance structure. So let's dig into rule number 1, outcome-based versus transaction-based business model. I love this Dilbert cartoon. It says, this class will make me more efficient. I don't want to be more efficient. You're working on a government contract and billing by the hour. Now go and bill them for the time you stood here, right? And so in a classic buy-sell relationship, it's a tit for tat. A service provider does not want to get paid for an activity. They want to have that transaction-based mentality, and vested breaks that mentality. Now, the pricing models can be either a cost plus or a fixed price per transaction, but they're very much anchored around the outcomes. And in many cases, what you start to see is a cost pass-through model where the buyer will actually just fund all the costs. The cost of the cost. I'm going to cover the cost. I'm going to pay you when you deliver results for doing the activities, right? So the dollar exchange and the economics become more anchored in the results, not just the activities. So rule number 2 is focus on the what, not the how. Now I love this quote from this concept called Joy's Law. It's actually got its name from Bill Joy, founder of Sun Microsystems, and he says no matter who you are, most of the bright people don't work for you. And I love reading the book by A.G. Lafley, recently retired CEO of P&G, because when he took the helm of P&G, he had this mantra of Joy's Law. P&G has amazingly bright talents, but there were about 1.5 million other researchers and developers that P&G could tap into. So why not take this philosophy as working with others and creating that win-win environment and having them help solve your problem. So P&G started this in the R&D perspective, but it soon spilled over into how they thought about services, and in particular to the service contract that they established with Jones Lang LaSalle. So we look at that rule, focus on the what, not the how, and I have a picture of a square watermelon. And the moral of the story of the square watermelon is the retailers in Japan had a little problem. They liked just-in-time delivery and distribution. They wanted one watermelon at a time. But for those, especially in the U.S. and other countries, we know that watermelons today are shipped in a big pallet, and you need a forklift to get them off the truck. Right? Well, the retailers in Japan didn't have the space. They didn't have forklifts in their stores. And so they challenged the farmers, how can we sell watermelons when we don't have a good distribution mechanism? So the farmers rallied together, being that they were entrepreneurial, they could sell watermelons and make a good profit. They figured out that if you put a seed in the ground and put a box around it, the watermelon would form to the box, and it would stay that size and ripen up in that box. So all the watermelons could be the exact same size. They could be put in a box and shipped one at a time and solve the distribution problem. So again, the moral of the story is if you tell somebody how to do something, you're going to get what you ask for. Instead, we should be asking what? We should be challenging them with our outcomes, what results we want, and letting the service providers tell us how they're going to get there. So what you see in a contract, in an outsourcing contract, is a very skinny statement of work. Instead of a prescriptive, detailed statement of work, you see an overarching statement of work that talks about just the simple accountabilities. You've got this accountability, I don't have it. So we actually like to think of it as a taxonomy. It's an inventory of the work and who is accountable for what pieces of the work, not a dictatorial how to do the work. Because we want those service providers to challenge the work and come up with creative, better ways. If it's all about the power of the and. How can you do the work and get better results? Well, I'm going to have to challenge how I'm doing it. So rule number 3 is clearly define and measurable desired outcomes. I love this wonderful quote from Yogi Berra. You've got to be very careful if you don't know where you're going because you might not get there. So one of the themes that we saw in common in these very successful buyer-supplier relationships is a desired outcome. Now, a desire is something you want and don't have. An outcome is a business result. So it's taking what you want for the future and you're saying, this is what I want to base my contractual relationship around. I want to buy the future. I don't want to buy today. I don't want to buy activities. I'm buying a future result, a desired outcome. So we need to be very clear about what those desired outcomes are, and that becomes the basis of our contract because you have to get the activities, but you really want those desired outcomes. So rule number 4 is a pricing model with incentives that optimize for trade-ups, right? And I'll point back here to Robert Solow. Now, I mentioned him earlier, but his findings, his academic findings are just absolutely brilliant, and it is intuitive, right? We all know that innovation is important. Well, in fact, it's so important that 87% of economic growth is driven by innovation, what Solow coined as technical change. And so if you look at this, only 13% of economic growth is driven by labor and physical capital. Well, how do we outsource today? We buy labor. We buy butts and seats. We buy a janitor to come in and clean the toilets. Or we buy capital. We buy their buildings so that the labor can sit in the building. And so that's a very myopic perspective. If you're structuring your deals around labor and capital, you need to be structuring your outsourcing relationships to drive innovation against those desired outcomes. Now, rule number 5 is insight versus oversight governance structure. What we see in these very successful relationships is a clear movement away from a me attitude to a we attitude. You know, in a traditional approach, we see companies adopt SRM, supplier relationship management, but it's still, I'm the buyer, you're the supplier, I'm managing you. And in these more successful deals, we see that paradigm shift where it's managing the business, not just the supplier. You're managing the business with the supplier. They are more of a peer. So the governance structures are more what we would call two in a box or peer to peer, where you're managing the business together. You're working together to achieve performance and compensation goals. You're communicating issues jointly. It's not a finger-pointing SLA red scorecard mentality. It's a business problem-solving, value creation. You know, how do I govern the business that I'm constantly working on things that are driving innovation and positive change into the business that's going to create value. So the benefits. I love this graphic. By the way, this graphic is courtesy of Procter & Gamble. I absolutely love this graphic. It's an analogy of two hands pulling on the rope in one direction. And this was a graphic that was in a presentation that their CIO did. By the way, Passerini won CIO of the Year. He runs the Global Business Services, which is that houses the outsourcing at P&G. Matt can tell you more. But think about this analogy, right? Your buyer and your supplier are on the same side of the rope, tugging against the problem. You put the problem or the desired outcomes against the buyer and the supplier, you're on the same side of the table tugging. You can create exponentially more power by working together with your supplier than working in a value exchange relationship, a transaction-based relationship. So the benefits of Vested is that it really moves you away from a supplier relationship to a solution relationship. The supplier has shared interest and creates buy-in and focus around those desired outcomes. And most of the time what you see is a focus shift to a TCO, right, a total cost of ownership and a return on investment focus versus a price-focused relationship. We want to make investments, so the supplier is positively making investments that will hopefully pan out and do well for the buyer. So how do you craft these deals? We have a book called the Vested Outsourcing Manual. We also have a course at the University of Tennessee that walks through how you structure these deals. Now, this book was actually written in conjunction with the International Association for Contract and Commercial Management, so kind of the nonprofit organization for contracting people. And so this manual walks through the rules and the components that should be in your contract. And you can look through that. You could take an existing relationship or outsourcing deal and kind of go through there and check yourself, wow, am I really buying desired outcomes, or am I buying activities? Does my statement of work look like X, or does it look more like a statement of objectives and a workload allocation? So a great resource for those who are wanting to learn more. And finally, I want to point out the who. And we're so fortunate today to have Matt on the phone call on the webinar, who's going to talk about the P&G case in more detail. But our favorite case studies are profiled in the book Vested, how P&G, McDonald's, and Microsoft are redefining winning in business relationships. And what you'll find is that Vested isn't just for real estate. It is for all types of things that get outsourced. So Microsoft is business process outsourcing, accounting, supply chain, environmental services, construction, IT, and even a nonprofit. So if you think about Water for People, they have relationships. They're just relationships with other governments and communities around the world. So it's not necessarily an outsourcing relationship. It's a relationship to achieve a desired outcome, in their case, eradicating water poverty. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt, who will talk about the P&G case study.
Hi, this is Dan Mextra, Chief Economist for MAPI and Director of the MAPI Purchasing Council. I'd like to introduce Matt McClish. Matt joined Procter & Gamble in 2003 and now serves as North American leader for the Global Asset Recovery Team. Prior to his current role, Matt was the group manager and outsourcing deal manager responsible for global facilities and real estate for P&G. Prior to joining P&G, Matt worked in a variety of consulting roles focused on consortium buyings for Fortune 500 companies. Matt holds a master's degree in business administration from Xavier University and a Bachelor of Science degree in industrial management from Purdue. Matt?
Great. Thanks, everyone, and thanks for having me today. And Kate, thank you for the great overview on the vested principles. I think for the folks on the phone, as we walk through my section of the presentation, you'll see those principles repeated in detail in how we think about structuring our facilities management outsourcing agreement. So the first slide I'll start with here is a view of our global headquarters located here in Cincinnati, Ohio. This picture was taken about 3 weeks ago. We were very happy to celebrate our 175th anniversary for P&G. We've been around for quite a long time, and we had a nice light display as we had our global leadership team in town celebrating. And so these are two of the many buildings that we have globally that are covered and managed under our facilities outsourcing agreement. You know, before we dive in, I spent a little bit of time on P&G. We are a global consumer products company. The brands you see here are a smattering of 50 of our leadership brands, our top brands that we produce. 24 of these brands generate over $1 billion in sales. And so brands like Dawn, Cascade, Pampers, Downy, Oral-B, Old Spice, Fusion, all brands that fit within there. Pampers being our largest brand, annual sales of about $10 billion. So a very diverse portfolio. Some of these brands on here you probably recognize. Hopefully you use them at home every day. Some of these brands you don't recognize, and that is because of our global presence. You see a couple brands up there like Ariel, which don't get a lot of, have no distribution here in the U.S., but very global company, very large company, and from a facilities management standpoint, a very challenging company when you think about the overall portfolio. Our portfolio, when it comes to the scope of the agreement I'll talk about with Jones Lang LaSalle, is for our office, our research and development labs, our studios, and our sales offices. And so that's over 120 sites globally, and it accounts for about 1.6 million square meters of non-manufacturing space. We have quite a bit of manufacturing space, as you can imagine. It's not in the scope of this deal. It is in a separate outsourcing agreement that we run. But as you can see with what Jones Lang LaSalle manages for us here, quite a large portfolio, several hundred of employees focused on delivering this work on a daily basis, both internally within P&G and externally with Jones Lang LaSalle. It is a global contract that we have with JLL. It was originally established in 2003, and I believe in the first of Kate's books is she, and again the fourth one as well, she outlines the history behind that initial outsourcing that we did with Jones Lang LaSalle, how we came about to select them as a partner and how we set up that initial agreement to move to them. The contract has been extended once in 2007, and then it was actually rewritten, and we awarded the business to Jones Lang LaSalle again just recently here in 2012. I was the deal manager for that work, working out of the Global Business Services along with the facilities and real estate team and the various other teams that were involved in that. So a lot of firsthand knowledge in the extension of that agreement and the recrafting of it as we move forward. The scope of services that are covered within our agreement are pretty detailed. Facilities and real estate manages is a little bit different as you go company to company, but the scope of our work includes this. It's the dining, the catering, and the canteen, cleaning, security, and landscaping, and facilities management. And facilities management is just one line there, but it's a big kind of bulk of what we talk about here from an outsourcing perspective. This is the maintenance of the actual equipment that goes into keeping the facility up and running, and so quite a bit of work goes into that. They also do project and event management for us. So the picture I showed first when we did the 175th lighting display, they managed that lighting display for us to get it set up. We had all of our global leaders in town for a week. This is VP and above level. That was completely managed by Jones Lang LaSalle from an event management standpoint, along with some internal support resources. So quite a bit of work they do for us in that space as well. And as you can imagine, that is one of our most important meetings throughout the year, and Jones Lang LaSalle is fully trusted to help manage that for us. They also do quite a bit of procurement for us. So within the agreement, as we've outsourced to them, they do not self-perform all of these services, and so these services are sourced out to other suppliers, and they actually have an internal purchasing staff managed at the global level that does that for us, and so we've outsourced procurement services to them as well. When you think about taking a step back and saying what really makes this agreement work and work well. Why have we been with them for 9 years, and why do we continue to see value with Jones Lang LaSalle for 9 years? There's really some very key themes that continue to come about, and they were things that we looked for in 2003 and things that we have invested and developed in to continue to grow the relationship up and through today. First is the outcome-based specifications. So Kate talked quite a bit about that. You know, P&G, when we outsourced this business to Jones Lang LaSalle in 2003, was actually set up quite well to manage the work ourselves. And by that I mean we had already gone through a massive internal reorganization of how we managed kind of our shared services, and that was the formation of the group that Kate referred to that I was a part of when I was in this group, which is called our Global Business Services, managed under Filippo Passerini, who is our CIO. And these are the shared services that the Global Business Services provides for all of our major business units. And so a lot of the IT services fall in there, a lot of the facilities and real estate services fall in there, and everything that you can imagine that's a shared service across the various organizations. We had already extracted that organization and set it aside to be managed separately. We had already taken a lot of the budgets and individual management of facilities away from the group presidents, away from the local entities, and moved it into this singular organization. And so I say that because we were set up very well, and you could argue that we had already, outsourcing for us was an interesting conversation because we felt like we were managing it very, very well. We were set up to manage it very well. We had scale. We were managing the 120 global sites already on a global basis. But outsourcing really allowed us to take it to the next level. And I think Kate's slide on the brightest people don't work for you. P&G, we consider ourselves to be very, very good at developing and selling and marketing consumer products. We are not real estate experts, although we have people in this organization from a facilities and real estate perspective that have been doing it for 25 years, 30 years that are fantastic. But it is not our core. It is not what we do as a core, and as Kate indicated with what A.G. Lafley said, is we want to focus on what is our core. And for what isn't our core, we will go off and we will find the best people in the industry. We will find the people where that is their core, because obviously those alliances and those partnerships we felt could grow our business. So after we had done all this work to centralize it, that's actually when we went to outsource. And that leads into outcome-based specifications because our scope was clear. We knew the work that was involved. We knew what success looked like. But even with that, outcome-based specifications were difficult for us. It's difficult to take a step back and say, I'll use an example like the cafeteria. What does a successful cafeteria look like? And not talk about the number of meals served, not talk about the hours that it's open, not talk about its operation really, but talk about, hey, are people satisfied? Are people getting what they need out of the cafeteria? Because really Jones Lang LaSalle, with their partner they deal with on food, knows how to manage a cafeteria much better than P&G. So it's a difficult conversation to take a step back and realize that, again, P&G, we pride ourselves on knowing quite a bit, but being able to say, we don't know. We know what we want to see. We know what we think success looks like. We will let our outsourced provider figure out what that looks like. Another example would be uptime on equipment. That would be an outcome-based specification. I really care about, is my equipment running? Is it efficient? What's its uptime? I don't care how many PMs you do. I don't care who you bring in to work on it. I don't care if you self-perform that work or you out-task that. I'm interested in you hitting your budget, and I'm interested in that equipment always being up. And so when Kate talks about lowering a scope of work, you can imagine a detailed scope of work on how to maintain a chiller. Boy, that could be many, many pages. But you can whittle it down to one or less, a few paragraphs if you would, when you talk about what you expect out of that equipment. That's a difficult road to travel. It's not easy. And you've got to have a partner that you trust. But by focusing on the outcome, you really open the door for the supplier's ability to be ingenuitive, to be able to go back and find within their own capabilities, which again we've stated is their core, on how they can deliver in that area and really drive some value. And so outcome-based specifications are very important. We also have a very balanced and a performance-based contract. And by that I mean there is a portion of their compensation which comes on a regular basis, and there is a portion of their conversation that's solely based on performance. And I'll get into later in the presentation how we think about that performance compensation. But it's very balanced, and it's very based on what they deliver. there are no penalties, okay, which is very important. We don't penalize them for not doing something. We reward them when they deliver. There's also a component of the contract linked to shared savings, which I'll talk about later, but really look to incentivize, if you will, the behaviors that we want versus penalizing the behaviors that we don't want. And I think that's an important connotation. We do a lot of benchmarking at P&G. We've seen a lot of contracts, and there are quite a few contracts that penalize the supplier for not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And that, again, I understand the reasons for that, but we've tried to really focus on driving the right behaviors here. We focus a lot on strong relationship management, which is very interesting. I think P&G has done a very good job here from a purchasing and from a deal management perspective. The relationship with the supplier is very important. Are they getting what they need from P&G to be successful? Do they have the data, the resources, the information? Are they being empowered by the customers that they deal with on a daily basis in order to deliver what they want? If none of those things, if some of those things are missing or some of those things aren't true, they're not going to perform at their peak. And so really when you think about how you manage a supplier versus how you manage a partner, those can be two very different things, and we very much try to manage Jones Lang LaSalle as a partner. And I wouldn't even use the term manage. We try to work with them as a partner to deliver our goals. And our contract, backed up to the performance-based contract, rewards them and brings value to P&G for when they're able to do that. The next is governance excellence. And so it dovetails in with strong relationship management. But the governance excellence piece, and I give Filippo and GBS leadership a lot of credit here, P&G treats governance as a skill set. The ability to administer and govern a contract and an outsourcing relationship is a unique skill set. It is not a purchasing skill set. It is not a legal skill set. It's not a skill set that a technical expert would have. We've developed and really created a governance capability within our company. And so we have governance experts that manage our large IT outsourcing agreements. They manage our transaction outsourcing agreements, and they manage our facilities and real estate outsourcing agreements. And so it is a skill set that's been fostered and developed for our key clients, or key customers, I should say, to make sure that we're getting the most value out of these relationships. Cultural fit's very important. It's something that we looked for very much in 2003. When we outsourced this business to Jones Lang LaSalle, we gave them many, many of our employees. Hundreds of our employees went over to Jones Lang LaSalle. And while that benefited us greatly because we had knowledge transfer that came over on day one, it was important to us that our employees that were going over there were going into an organization that had a cultural fit that matched P&G's, that would work well with Procter & Gamble, that had the same long-term goals that we had. And so, the culture of a company is something that's difficult to measure in a bid format, but if you read a lot of the research, it's one of the prevailing things that dominates how a company makes decisions is what their culture is. And it's one of the most difficult things to change. And so as we looked at Jones Lang LaSalle, we looked at their culture, we felt it was a very good match. And over time, it's proven to be one of the most important things that we have with them, because as we look to develop new initiatives, as we look to innovate, as we looked at the 2007 and 2012 contract extensions and the new contracts we signed with them, it was the culture and the approach that Jones Lang LaSalle brought that made those things feasible and doable. Now, they weren't necessarily easy, but the path moving forward was clear because we were both headed in the same direction. And so cultural fit's very important. The last two here, trust and respect. I think in outsourcing, a very, very undervalued thing is the trust and respect. We've outsourced this business to JLL, and we'll get into how we define outsourcing. We have great trust in them. We have great mutual respect with them in regards to their capabilities. Again, they are not our supplier. They are our partner. One of the great examples I'll give here is a couple of years ago, we were dealing with closing a facility. And as we were closing the facility, there was some other purchasing organizations that were getting involved. And I kept getting calls from one of my counterparts in another group to say, we really need you to join these calls and to be involved in this work. And I said, well, actually, the person that owns this work is a JLL account person, and they should be they are the owner for this. They should be the one attending the calls. Just keep me in the loop, but this is the person that owns it. And it took a couple of phone calls, it took a couple of emails for this other person within P&G to really grasp the concept of, no, they own this. They represent Procter & Gamble. This is within their budget. They own this work, but it truly is the way we try to go about our business. And that's why you see JLL interacting on a daily basis with our key leaders and with people within our organization. That is why they have won within Procter & Gamble. They were a they've won twice in the course of the 9 years they've been with us, P&G Supplier of the Year, which is our highest award that we can give to a supplier, and they've won a 3-time GBS Excellence Award winner, which is the awards that we give within GBS for supplier excellence. So very highly touted, very highly respected for the work that they've been able to do for us. And the final thing speaks to what Kate was referencing before in regards to win-win. We were very careful when we crafted this agreement to think about where do we want to be in the future. Okay, we did not outsource for where we were at that day because we understood that, yes, there were probably some short-term wins we get from outsourcing, but really we wanted to craft a vision of where we expected facilities and real estate to be in 4 years, in 5 years, and set Jones Lang LaSalle up for success in order for them to get there, and for us to reap the long-term benefits of an outsourcing. It's the same thing that we did in 2007, and it's the same thing that we did in 2012. So as we've asked Jones Lang LaSalle to step forward or put more skin in the game, we too have put more skin in the game. We too have stepped forward. We have incentivized them more to deliver. And so what we've seen from that is that we have received great value from that, but equally as important, they have grown their business. They've grown their business with Procter & Gamble, and we've represented them and helped them, and through the learnings they've had in this agreement, they've grown their business outside of Procter & Gamble as well. And so we continue to remain focused on that win-win relationship with them and making sure that our contracts and our agreements are set up to do that. We've talked a little bit about outsourcing and what that means. We've done a lot of benchmarking at Procter & Gamble, and I've been involved in other outsourcing deals, and I think that this is defining what outsourcing means, I think, is important, because what I've found is it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. At P&G, Jones Lang LaSalle manages the sites, they manage all the projects, and they manage all the budgets associated with the two above. They interact daily with our customers, and they are at the table in representation to our leadership. We have truly given responsibility to them for them to deliver. And as I go and look at many outsourcing benchmarks, there are companies that do this very, very well, but there are companies that struggle in letting go. They struggle in establishing truly a governance organization that provides oversight to the relationship versus insight, and I think Kate talked about that, in managing their daily tasks. Shadow organizations have formed. You don't get the benefits that you do because you've got double the overhead. All of a sudden the supplier starts getting managed on daily tasks versus the overall outcome. And all of a sudden you start grinding to a halt when it comes to innovation and delivery, and some of the most mundane, simple tasks that you see that should be delivered become huge fights and battles. And so we've been very clear as we outsource this work. We did not backfill the roles that existed before. We were very clear as we set up our governance relationships what those roles were, what they were doing. We have significantly less people in facilities and real estate than we did before because that work has truly been outsourced, and they have responsibility for those areas. And so I like to say one of the best things that we did was to let go and let JLL really trust in our relationship with them and trust in the contract and the performance metrics that we had. We really focused on having the end in mind of where we wanted to go and then setting up our relationship with them to hopefully get us there. When we talk about governance, we're very clear in the areas where we govern and very clear in the things and the metrics that we check. We've broken them into 4 areas: finance, which obviously is the delivery of the budget; the contract, which is where, from a commercial perspective, purchasing would get involved, making sure that we were being true to the contract accurately represented the work that was happening. And so we did some contract updates as time went along, and with each major change in 2007, 2012, we did some major revamps. And in 2012, we actually completely rewrote the contract as we looked at them. So we've tried to grow and move along as our relationship with Jones Lang LaSalle has matured. We also measure performance management, which I'll dive into, and relationship management. Relationship management, we spend a good deal of time, because this is a global agreement, really truly understanding how the business is perceived and how the delivery is happening for our customers at a local level. And so the governance organization that we've set up matches exactly with the management organization that JLL has structured. And so it's very clear from a counterpart standpoint how we operate. And that's how we really measure whether or not the delivery is occurring. And so we've got great information on how they're performing right now in Sao Paulo, Brazil. in our Brazilian headquarters down there, and we can get information on various organizations. And so we don't see the situation where massive regions like North America or Western Europe are outshining smaller regions from a performance perspective. We've done a good job of really understanding those relationships, how's it working, both internally from how our customers feel, and with Jones Lang LaSalle, how their internal folks feel in regards to the relationship and how it's working and how it's developing. And in that way, I really give a lot of credit to the GBS leadership. We've been able to stay in front of a lot of issues because we really do take the time to keep focused in on how the relationship is working from both sides of the map. Diving in a little bit more to the performance management side, we break our performance indicators into critical elements and to key elements. And those are aligned with Jones Lang LaSalle in advance. They are updated on an annual basis depending on how the performance is, and they are very linked to their compensation. And so they understand very critically what P&G expects of them to deliver, and these are all outcome-based measures, and whether or not they're delivering those for us. And we review those scorecards on a quarterly basis to ensure they're happening. There's also a section of discretionary metrics that we keep as well, which measure things like the relationship, any key projects they're working for us, and innovation. And so those are updated on a regular basis as well. And the weighting of those is changed depending on what's important for us as a business this year. But there's quite a bit of transparency here. So Jones Lang LaSalle clearly understands what our expectations are, and they can ensure they're delivering against it. And that's all tied back to their compensation. So they're compensated for working on the things and delivering for the things that are most important to us. It seems like a fairly obvious concept. It took a lot of work and continues to take a lot of work to make sure it's being managed correctly. But to the point that Kate made earlier around cutting a check to the supplier at the end of the year, we do that. And we hope that we cut a very, very big check at the end of the year, because the bigger of a check that we cut, the more they're meeting our needs. And I know that sounds a little bit backwards, but it's very true. Everything that they do and deliver for us is linked to a business return back to us. And as you can imagine, I think we've written the contract in such a way that there's a good balance there. And so having them come back at the end of the year and get delivery on their performance indicators and discretionary measures means that we had a great year. And that's a true definition of a win-win. If for some reason we're not able to write as big of a check as we'd like, then we had some challenges. And P&G takes a little bit of a hit there, as does Jones Lang LaSalle. So we win together or we lose together. And the last piece is the shared savings. And this is a critically important component to the delivery of the work. We have several in our contract. We have several areas where we need additional innovation. We want Jones Lang LaSalle to lean forward and deliver above and beyond what our expectations are, which I think everybody would agree is important. And the key point, though, is we are willing and very ready to compensate them for those wins. And I think that's critically important, because as we've done a lot of benchmarking, one of the key things we always hear in the marketplace is, how do I get more innovation? How do I get more innovation? And you take a step back and you look at their contract and you say, well, you're task-based managing them on absolutely everything they do, and you're watching them, standing over your supplier and watching them to make sure they're dotting all their I's and crossing all their T's, and they're delivering exactly what it is you tell them you want them to do. So where in reality are you going to see any innovation? Because innovation may mean they don't do the tasks the way that you want them to do. Innovation may mean that they skip some steps or create some new steps. But the way you're structured, you don't give them, you actually could penalize them for making those improvements or driving those changes. And so the shared savings allows us to, one, support the outcome-based measures which allow them to innovate, but two, if they lean forward and they take on those challenges and they over-deliver for us, we feel very comfortable that they should get rewarded for that, and they should get a piece of that over-delivery. And this has been extremely successful for us, extremely successful. And we've gotten, we think, some very good improvements and been happy to compensate JLL for the improvements that they've brought to the table. And so we continue to look at shared savings as being a very strong piece of our contract. And I think Jones Lang LaSalle would agree. It is a great incentive for their overall business and something that they focus very clearly on. The last slide here is just really the key takeaways. And so, with Kate's presentation, you've seen kind of the overview from a theoretical standpoint of the items, and then hopefully with the P&G presentation, you've seen where those elements come to pass and how we've been able to use them to really deliver value in the space. The key takeaways as I think about the themes from the P&G side is just being very clear in your scope, understanding your business, understanding what you plan to outsource, and understanding how you want that work to be managed. We were very, very prepared to outsource this space. And like I said in the beginning, in some cases you could argue we had it in such a good spot that the question we had a lot was, are we going to be able to find anybody else in the industry that can do it better than us? And the answer clearly is, of course, that's not our core business. But we were ready for outsourcing. If we would have been fragmented, if we wouldn't have understood our scope, and we looked to outsourcing as the way to bring that together, I think it would have been disastrous. Not to say there's not companies that can do that or have done that well, but you have to be structured for it and prepared in your rollout and your transition to really take those steps to understand your business. And outsourcing is not a good way, in my opinion, to understand your business. You need to understand it first. That's how you set up the outsourcing agreement to succeed. That's how you establish the second bullet here, the outcome-based measures. Very difficult to establish outcome-based measures if you don't know what you're looking for in your business. We picked a supplier that could help us with that, but that was a lot of work that we had to do up front, and a lot of work that we continue to look at to make sure our outcome-based measures deliver. Truly outsource your business. Step away. Trust your supplier. Give them the ability to run and manage the business. That's how you will really get the benefit. That's how you'll save on your time and the energy you're putting towards it. That's how you really unlock the potential of hopefully the expert that you've aligned with to do the business and really move forward together. Manage the relationship, manage the partnership. Don't just manage the supplier. Don't manage the contract. Don't manage the budget, but also manage the relationship. Make sure it's healthy. Make sure folks are empowered to deliver, and focus on a win-win balance. That's something that we continue to work on a daily basis here, making sure that we're driving win-wins. It may mean that when you're at the negotiation table, you take a step back and you look at where do I want to be in 5 years and how will this get this for me? Do I want to take, I think Kate said earlier, do I want to get this thing for $1? Do I want to try to negotiate down to 90 cents? Or do I want to figure out how in 5 years I can get it for 50 cents with the help of this supplier? It's hard to back away from that 90 cents. As a purchasing trained person, I can tell you it's really hard to back away from the 90 cents. But understand the business, understand where it can go. Maybe you want to go after the 90 cents, but if you can get it for 50 in 5 years, if you're set up correctly, or in some completely different mode or method, you need to be thinking about that as well, and always having the win-win in the back of the mind as the overriding theme of your relationship, I think, is critically important. So that covers the P&G stance on P&G coverage here on the facilities management. I'll turn it back to the MAPI folks to see if there's any questions.
Great, thank you, Matt. Now I'm going to unmute everyone. If you have...
The conference has been unmuted.
Okay, now everyone can speak. Before you ask the question, please identify yourself.
Yes, I have a question. My name is Heidi Landry Chan. I'm from Dow Corning.
Yes.
My question is in identifying your service provider, did you go through an extensive RFP? How many partners originally quoted in that? And what term of the contract did you set with them? For example, like a 5-year contract? Do you bid it out occasionally, or do you just rely on performance measures to keep them on track?
So a couple parts there. The first part is, how many did we look at? And we started very broad. And so as we first got into this business, who were the key players? It was an item that was a very good question. We used a lot of external resources to help us, particularly in the facilities and real estate. There are several. We used external legal resources. We used external consulting resources to really help us understand the map of how the industry looked. Over time, we've kept that up, and so we go externally less, but we spend a significant amount of time benchmarking. We, in the beginning, did RFP the business, but I think as time has gone on, we really have a much better understanding of what we're looking for. We have a very good understanding of who's out there in the market who can deliver, and so we did probably less of a focus in the latter, in say 2007, 2012, we looked more at where we wanted to go and the trends in the marketplace and who could help us deliver within those, versus I think back in 2003 it was much more of a what you call a typical outsourcing. So here is a bid, here's our specifications, here's what we're looking for, please respond. Although there was still a level on top of that where there were many, many face-to-face meetings, many, many yellow pad sessions to try to get to understand the supplier, understand their culture, things that weren't available on a piece of paper. Because frankly speaking, I think once you go and implement these outsourcing agreements, it's their approach, it's their vision as to where they want to go, it's their culture that really drive you where you're going. And what's on the paper obviously is important, but those are the things that map out the relationship. Our initial term was 5 years, and we made that choice based on the time that we felt necessary to really understand if the agreement was going to work, and also the benchmarks that we had. But I think that's also very determinant on your business, the value you can get, for the time that you put out there. But we did want to go at least 5 years to see if we, to really give the relationship a chance to grow and to mature.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here as well. Matt talked about the importance of compatibility and trust, and obviously you can earn the trust over the life of that contract. But the compatibility and the cultural fit are very important. And what we're seeing in these RFP processes is less emphasis on the price, because again, you're not focusing on buying a price today for an activity. You're looking at, do you have the capability and the cultural fit to go with us on a journey to create something neither one of us has done before. Mm-hmm. And so really the fit is very important. And in the book we actually outline a little bit about the process of how P&G did that. And they, in the RFP processes, really are more of a what we'll call an RFS, a request for solution, and a de-emphasis on the price. Right? Mm-hmm. Because you're not speccing a detailed activity that you can get a detailed price for. So the pricing models are very different in these relationships. So there's a less emphasis on price and more on capabilities and cultural fit and compatibility to go to the future place. You're also seeing in these deals, what Matt alluded to, is not necessarily going out to market for the extensions, but using benchmarking and having the supplier, in essence, compete against themselves to maintain and keep that business, almost like an evergreen contract, right? So if they perform well, they earn extensions. Now, many of the relationships actually have extensions built in. So, you hit a home run in year one, you automatically get a year added on. So your 5-year contract is always a 5-year contract as long as you're performing. Right? And so you're buying the future. So if you create that value for me in year one, I'm going to give you the opportunity to earn it in year 6. And the reason why you want to have those longer-term contracts is because the suppliers are often making investments in the innovation, process innovation, technical innovations. They're investing in your business for the hope of that bonus payment, right? And so if I have a 1-year contract, or if I have a contract that is in year 4 and it's going to expire in year 5 and I know you're going to bid it out, I'm probably not going to make the aggressive investments in year 4 because there's a chance of me losing that. So instead you have this mentality that they're competing against the future and their ability to drive that future. And many of the relationships, 5 years is really the minimum that we see. And often we see deals that are 7 years, and the Jaguar Unipart relationship's a 10-year. They just re-upped for another 10 years. So they are definitely longer term in nature. With the minimum that we see is 5. Microsoft was 7 years, and in year 2 they added 5 more years. Or they added early. P&G added early, and that's because they're like, hey, you're doing so well, I want to give you that opportunity to continue to make investments in the business. I don't want you to get up to our bid expire, our contract expiring, and then take it out to market.
No, someone stole it. Okay. Bring it over here. It belongs over here.
This is Nathan with Ingersoll, and I had just 3 different questions, and one was kind of speak to what you were just talking about. With those longer-term contracts, so first question is just with the longer-term contracts, do you do you typically do outs with those? And what type of outs do you do? And then second question was this a global? Clearly P&G is global. Is this a global P&G? Are they doing things across the ocean? And then the third, are you guys with the bigger facility things, security, janitorial, and those types of things? Are they participating in some of those subcontracts, or are they totally outsourcing that to Jones Lang LaSalle?
So I'll give you our perspective, and then Kate can jump in. So I guess I'll start with your second question. It's a global agreement. We do not have an office or an R&D or a sales office or a salon, for that matter, that Jones Lang LaSalle is not running for us. So they manage absolutely everything, and so they manage our salons in New York and our headquarters here. The first question again was on the outs. I mean, the way the contract is structured, there are obviously outs that are in there. I think the important thing though is we are committed to the partnership, and so as we establish this, equally as you get into negotiations, obviously, if you want an out, the supplier is going to want an out, and so they're in there, but when you have a global agreement, very extensive agreement like this, our focus is clearly on it would be an extreme challenge to move and the supply.
To get out of it.
Right. So our focus more in is how do we continue to keep the agreement fresh 7, 8, 9 years in, right?
Yep.
How do we continue to deliver? But yeah, I mean, of course, there's some outs that are in there.
Okay.
And your third question, I'm sorry, refresh my memory.
Well, just with your subcontracts,
Yes.
are you participating in any of those?
So as we said from the outsourcing, JLL manages all of those subcontracts.
Okay.
We are notified through our governance process if they want to make a change or if they complete a sourcing initiative. We're notified in advance. We actually do give approval. We can ask questions and whatnot. So we have some visibility. If we had a major issue with a selection or a transfer plan, by all means they want to hear that. But they run that completely within their own organization. And all the contracts that are established with these subs are established with Jones Lang LaSalle. P&G does not have a contract. My headquarters here in Cincinnati, I do not have a contract with my security provider.
Okay.
I have one with Jones Lang LaSalle, and they have it with the security provider.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here on the outs. We actually definitely see a trend moving away from a termination for convenience, right? You're in it together, and this is a long-term thing. Now, business does happen. I love to say that business happens, and so sometimes you got to make a change. Now, there is termination for cause. So if the supplier isn't performing, absolutely, there should be a termination for cause. But what we see is a very detailed exit management plan. If things went wrong, how do you untangle? An extremely well thought out exit management plan, but often an elimination of a termination for convenience. You jump off a cliff. You're in it for the long haul. You win together, you lose together. Right?
Yeah.
And then with regard to the participating of the subs, I think it's really interesting and fascinating. When we were doing our research, Jones Lang LaSalle originally, and everyone tells us this, they're like, well, P&G's just special. They just get it, and we can't replicate this with other customers. They just, P&G's is special. And so what we've done in our research is go, you know what? It's a mindset and a methodology, and it can be replicated. And kudos to Jones Lang LaSalle, because they actually took the concept as we were going through the research, and they've decided to take and drill down. One of the largest subs is Compass on dining services, and they're taking and they've converted, or in the process of converting, the Compass relationship to a vested relationship. Because after all, if P&G and Jones Lang LaSalle can create so much value using a vested mindset and approach, why can't Jones Lang LaSalle also reap that great innovation and mindset and approach with Compass? So Compass was very excited, and we led a workshop with them, kind of teaching them the fundamentals. And I've been to P&G's headquarters where they had the whole teams together, really talking about how they could bring that mindset to hit a home run. You hit a home run for Jones Lang LaSalle, it hits a home run for P&G. It's a triple win now, right? That's even better.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I know some people still have questions, but unfortunately we run out of time here. I really want to thank both Kate and Matt for their excellent presentation today, and thank all participants for joining us. You will receive an evaluation survey sent out by ReadyTalk, and we'll greatly appreciate if you can just let us know how we are doing with the webinar and what we can do to improve. The webinar is recorded, and we're going to send a link as well as the presentation slides to everyone here today. In the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to either contact me or Dan or Kate or Matt. This webinar is now, you can hang up now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Please stand by.